At exactly 30 seconds in, the chamber detonated like a vault ripped open with dynamite. The gavel struck, its echo slicing the air, and Judge Andrew Napolitano's decree landed with the weight of $15,000 in fines hurled like a hammer toward Jasmine Crockett. Papers fluttered in the blast of his words, and the sound of muffled gasps from aides felt like walls shattering. $15,000 for what he sneered as disrespect. A price tag on dignity, on defiance. But whose disrespect would history remember, the judge's or Jasmine's? The hearing room itself seemed alive, breathing through the marble cracks, the fluorescent light bleeding across the tables, like a wound refusing to clot. The air whispered, not soft but sharp, each hiss curling with menace, as if the walls themselves remembered every injustice hidden behind polished oak. Chairs groaned like witnesses. Even silence had teeth, and it bit down hard. Judge Napolitano leaned back in his chair, the smugness on his face heavy, as though daring Jasmine to recoil. He thought he had cornered her with his fine, thought he had branded her as reckless and diminished. But Jasmine sat upright, still, unblinking, a calm storm waiting. Around them, whispers of staffers fused with the electronic hum of cameras feeding millions of homes. Families gathered in kitchens and living rooms. Children leaned close to television screens. Communities who had seen money vanish from their neighborhoods now watched as $15,000 became more than a figure, it became a spark. Why would a judge risk so much credibility just to silence one woman? And what truth could Jasmine Crockett possibly hold that would make $15,000 look like pocket change compared to what was about to be revealed? The silence had not even settled when Jasmine leaned forward, her voice steady, her gaze unbroken, the chamber bending around her composure. Judge Napolitano still clutched his gavel like a weapon, but the weight of it seemed lighter now, fragile against what she was about to unleash. Jasmine's hands moved with surgical control as she reached into her folder, the paper thick, almost wet with ink, the texture like skin that remembered every hand it passed through. When she placed it on the table, the room's air changed. "This is not about $15,000, Jasmine said, her tone cutting but calm. "This is about 2 million misused under your watch. 2 million that should have repaired broken schools in East St. Louis, should have replaced lead pipes, poisoning children like 7-year-old Marcus Hill, who now needs a respirator at night." The document pulsed in the spotlight, a ledger with names and signatures, numbers that bled truth in columns that whispered louder than the judge's gavel ever could. The judge's jaw twitched, and his voice rose, but Jasmine raised a single hand. The gesture sliced the air, commanding silence without volume. Her words fell with surgical exactness. "You don't find truth. You expose it." Gasps spread across the chamber. At home, mothers reached for their children tighter. Fathers clenched fists at the kitchen table. And teenagers pulled out their phones, flooding feeds with clips of Jasmine's one-line. Hashtags were not needed. The quote traveled on its own breath. Judge Napolitano tried to interrupt, but his words stumbled over themselves. Jasmine calmly slid another paper forward. This one was thicker, edges worn, a contract that seemed to breathe. The room's walls leaned closer, as though eager to hear its secret. And then she spoke the words that began to tear the judge's facade apart. The room was still reeling when Jasmine pressed her fingertips against the worn contract, her nails tapping once, twice, like a countdown to detonation. "This," she said, voice a blade drawn slow, "is the agreement that funneled 2 million meant for families into the pockets of private consultants you personally approved." The fluorescent lights seemed to sharpen, dissecting the judge's face as his smirk faltered. She did not raise her tone. She did not need to. Instead, she flipped the page with deliberate care, the paper groaning as though it resisted revealing what it carried. Names gleamed in black ink, signatures looping like nooses. At the bottom, one stood out, bold and unshaken: Andrew Napolitano, The judge's own mark, exposed under surgical lighting. "You took from them," Jasmine continued, her words scalpel clean, "from 23 families who now face eviction because school repairs never came. From the Diaz family, where 12-year-old Rosa studies under a leaking roof with buckets catching rain beside her bed. From the Thompsons, who lost their corner store after water damage went unfixed. Each name landed heavier than the last, each story stitching human pain directly to the judge's pen." Napolitano leaned forward, knuckles whitening, his attempt at control collapsing into desperation. "This is out of order," he barked, but his voice cracked on the last word. Jasmine tilted her head slightly, eyes narrowing with precision. "Order?" she said softly, yet the room shook with it. "Order is children breathing clean air, roofs that do not cave, water that does not poison. You fined me 15,000 for disrespect. How much should they fine you for 2 million stolen dreams?" The crowd outside the chamber erupted, chants rolling through the walls, shaking the marble like thunder. Cameras zoomed tighter. Jasmine's hand slid to another folder, thicker than the last, its spine bending like a loaded bow. Before the echoes of chanting could fade, Jasmine pulled the second folder into the light. It was not hurried, it was orchestral, each motion deliberate, as though time itself obeyed her. The folder's weight thudded onto the table, and the sound sliced through the chamber like a guillotine. Its edges were frayed, but its contents radiated menace pages that seemed to pulse with heat, ink that bled like fresh wounds. Judge Napolitano tried to steady his voice, tried to summon the arrogance that once made aides tremble, but his throat betrayed him with a dry crack. Jasmine lifted the first sheet, holding it by the corner, so the seal at the top glared under the surgical lights. She turned it slowly, letting cameras drink in every line. It was a state audit, line after line of vanished funds, signatures mismatched, expenditures listed as educational outreach, but traced back to shell corporations. 2 million gone, Jasmine said, pausing, letting the silence breathe. And here is where it bled into your friends' accounts. Shell firms tied to former staffers, payments labeled as community renewal, while Marcus Hill sleeps with a mask strapped to his face, while Rosa Diaz studies by candlelight because water drips shorted the wires. The judge slammed his gavel, desperate now, but it splintered on the desk, wood fracturing like his defense. "You mistake volume for victory," Jasmine murmured, eyes unflinching. She raised another page, the paper stiff as bone. "Justice doesn't scream, it documents." The chamber erupted. Viewers at home repeated the phrase aloud, like scripture. On buses, in laundromats, in classrooms, phones replayed her words on endless loops. Elderly couples cried together in silence, nodding as though finally vindicated. Judge Napolitano's hands trembled. His tie seemed to strangle rather than steady. He leaned forward with venom, spitting, "You are nothing but a grandstanding fraud." Jasmine's calm smile cut deeper than any scream. "Frauds hide their names. I just showed yours." She tapped the page, the signature pulsing like a heartbeat exposed. The chamber walls leaned inward, as if the building itself demanded the final blow. Jasmine did not rush. She opened the last folder, the thickest yet, its spine creaking like a coffin, disturbed. The papers inside gleamed with glossy photographs, images of collapsed classrooms, mold-blackened ceilings, rusted pipes leaking into children's beds. Each photograph was mounted with receipts stapled at the corners, proof of money allocated, proof of work never done. "This is not theory," Jasmine said, her voice precise as a scalpel. "This is 2 million siphoned into shadows, while human lives bore the cost." She lifted a photo of Rosa Diaz's classroom, ceiling bowed, plaster fallen in heaps around small desks. She is 12 years old. She writes essays about wanting to be an engineer, while her school collapses above her head. Your signature signed away her safety. Gasps rippled through the chamber, louder than any gavel. Jasmine set down another page, a medical invoice with bold red letters. Unpaid. 7-year-old Marcus Hill now depends on a breathing machine because lead never removed from his water burned his lungs. His mother works double shifts to afford electricity to keep the machine running. She asked me to tell you this. Judge, you fine Jasmine $15,000. My son's life is worth more than your silence. The words detonated. Napolitano's face drained pale, sweat streaking down his temples. He stammered half-sentences, grasping for bluster, but every syllable drowned under the rising roar from outside. Protesters beat drums, their chants shaking the windows, their voices climbing through every crack of marble. Jasmine closed the folder with a final, deliberate snap. You do not fine me into silence, she said. You fine yourself into history's shame. Napolitano slumped back, the collapse complete, his gavel broken, his authority in shards.